intro to Python. So in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about lists and how we can use them to our advantage. So first, let's talk about what a data structure is. So a data structure is used to store different variables of different data types and can also store data structures themselves. So one popular data structure in Python is called a list. Lists can store strings, ints, booleans, lists themselves, and so on. So you can initialize a list like this. So let's call our list names. And then you can also add items to the list by using the append function. So names.append. Let's append John. And you can also have variables of strings, Carl, and then I can just append n2 to append Carl. And you can also print out lists by just doing that. Let's run that. And right now we just have John and Carl. And when I was saying you can store lists within lists, let's test that out. You can do names.append. Let's go with Bob, Pam. So if we print out names, now we have three elements: John, Carl, and Bob and Pam. And you can also append objects to lists. So let's go ahead and import turtle at the top. And now let's create a turtle. And then we can append t to names. And then let's print out names again. So now you have John, Carl, Bob, Pam, and then a turtle object as the last element. You can access items within a list similarly to how you can access characters within a string by using brackets and an index. So if you want to get John, or the first element, you can do print names 0. And then if you run that, you should just get John. Now I'm just going to get rid of the turtle, so we don't really need it anymore. It's just opening up a new window. So you can use the length function to know how many items are in a list. Similarly to how you can know how many characters are within a string with the same function. So let's print out len names. Do that. See, print t is not defined. Oh, this line right here, let's get rid of that. And let's run it again. And we see that there are 3 elements in the list. So the next thing we can learn is the pop function. And you can use the pop function to remove elements of the list. So if you do names.pop and then print out names, you just get John and Carl because Bob and Pam have been popped out. And if you want names.pop, the function actually returns, it deletes the last element, but it also returns the last element. So if you wanted to save the last element for some reason, say you have a variable called last, and then you can actually print last now. You can save that just before deleting it. So now you have Bob and Pam right here. So if you ever need the last element for any reason, you can always have it stored in a variable. So now let's talk about the insert function. So Get rid of that. So you can also insert by names.insert, and there are two parameters to this function. So first is the index, and then is the object. So let's just put in my name, print names, you see that I'm the second element of the list. So a useful technique is using the len function to access the last element of a list. There's going to be several times where you use that to access the last element. So let's print out. So we need to access the last element, so we need names, of course. And then within the brackets, we can type in len names -1. So let's print that out. And now we see that Bob and Pam are printed out because they're the last element. So if we get rid of the -1, we get an error that says list index out of range. And that's because if you recall, strings and lists and almost everything in programming start off with the index being 0. So that's why we need the -1. So that's how that works. And now let's learn how to iterate over a list. So let's just clear the names list, and you can do that by just creating a new list with the same name. And let's append some names first. Okay, so one way we can iterate through a list is by using a for loop with an index. So we can do names, and then you can actually print out each name. So if you recall, I is the index, so in the first loop it's going to be 0. So when the first time it runs in the first loop, it's going to print out John, and then it's going to be 1, so then it's going to be Carl, and then Pam, and then Jim. So let's go ahead and run that. You get John, Carl, Pam, and Jim. So now there's another way you can actually traverse through the list is by just using the list itself without any range. You can have for name and names and print names. So I mean name, and then yeah, okay. So now if we print that, we should still get John, Carl, Pam, and Jim. And ideally, this and this are they're no different in terms of functionality, because if you recall, the range function actually gives you a list of numbers. So in this case, the length is 4, so it's going to be range of 4, right? And the range of 4 gives you 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now I is going to be each item within this list. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, and 3. And that's how the range function works. For this for loop, you're essentially doing the same thing. It's just that instead of range of 4, you're going to have the list of names that we created here. And then the name will represent John, Carl, Pam, and Jim instead of the indices themselves. That's how that works. And now let's create another list called ages. And for the same amount of names, we'll append an empty string to the ages list. Let's just print out age to make sure that's filling up correctly. Oh, it is. So we see that the ages list has 4 empty strings. Now, let's say we wanted to go through the list and search for Pam's location. All you have to do is for I in range run names, and in this case we do want to know her location, so we will be using the range function. So if names I equals Pam, if that's true, we'll print her location now, and we'll change her age to be 34. And that's how you can actually change individual items on a list. So if you recall, strings are immutable, but lists are mutable. So you can change items within a list whenever you want. Unlike a string, which you can't change the characters whenever you want. So now, if we print out ages, we get 34 in Pam's location. So now let's step away from the names and create a function called defcalc avg. And what this function is basically going to do is that it's going to take in a list of numbers and then calculate the average of those numbers for us. So let's create a variable called final sum, set that equal to 0, and then let's create a for loop for num in list. And let's update the sum each time there's a new number. And then let's return final sum divided by the length of the list. And the length of the list determines how many numbers there are, so that works perfectly. And then if we do print calc avg, then input a list like 459. If we do that and run that, that returns 6. So 4 plus 5 is 9, 9 plus 9 is 18, 18 divided by 3 is 6, so we know it is working correctly. And well, that's it for this lesson. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hope to see you in the next one.